rich couple that, they sincerely covet the club title, and
Mm.
they're not as good as you are. I know you were on the UCLA team, but
Yeah.
well, I want to play them because I need their portfolio.
Mhm.
Just try not to be too good.
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own interest to help others. And today it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome Gerald Everett Jones. Now, Gerald is a freelance author and writer who lives in Santa Monica, California, and Preacher Raises the Dead is his 12th novel. Now, he's a longtime board member of the Independent Writers of Southern California and the host of the Get Published radio show podcast. Welcome, Gerald.
Well, thank you, Damien. And I should advise that I'm here on the left coast of California. It happens to be summer here. And as I understand, having lived in Kenya south of the equator, I know that that's not summer where you are.
It's certainly not summer. It's very cold. I'm actually sitting here where I am located. I'm at the beach house at the moment, and I've got the fireplace going beside me. It is actually, although it's not windy, it is actually very, very cold right now. So
Well, yeah, it's very strange. I mean, and of course, you can blame climate variability. Maybe that's the new term, climate variability. But, our country is making headlines because it's the hottest through the south and southwest that it has been in a very long time, in 100 degrees Fahrenheit and above. And that's true in many parts of Southern California where I am, except I happen to be on the Pacific Ocean, and it has been chillier than it has been in years here.
we get that variability. How much data do we need to know to whether there is actually is? I mean, obviously things are getting a little bit warmer. We get that, and we want to do as
Well,
much as we
that
can to protect
it's
the environment.
difficult. I'm very much of a believer in science, if you will. I don't know, believer is the wrong word. Follower of scientific discoveries, and my book series, the Preacher Evan Wycliffe series, that fellow is, you might call him, I don't know whether I'd go so far as to say an agnostic minister, an occasionally doubting minister, and his story is, and it's somewhat similar to my background, is that he went to Harvard Divinity School, which is a Unitarian school. Some people might say Christianity light. And he found out way too much about the history of the Christian church and decided, well, maybe I can get some answers in astrophysics, because he's a rather bright fellow. Enrolled in MIT, dropped out of there, also disappointed. So then he returns to his farm roots in southern Missouri. But speaking to the climate change, if you will, yes, there does seem to be a pretty large body of evidence that temperatures worldwide are warming. But another fact that really is not discussed much, because possibly we can't do anything about it, is we are overdue for the next ice age. Those happen about every 20,000 years. So is it
Yeah.
possible this is the instability, the big warming before the big chill?
Mm.
And then as well, we have species extinction. As I told you on background, my wife and I lived in Kenya for a couple of years. In the sub-equatorial climate zone. So yes, it was winter there. I learned what it was like.
Yeah.
To celebrate Christmas in the warm weather. And human wildlife conflict is very much the issue and the concern there, in that you've got a country that is really beginning to grow very rapidly from a technological standpoint. They're even starting to call it Silicon Savannah. And yet you have human-animal conflict in that, some farmer or some shopping mall or whatever might put itself right in the middle of a migratory path if they don't do their environmental study. And the elephants are going to come through there, as they have for millions of years. And there's going to be a problem. The elephants are likely to be hunted and killed if they are causing the humans some inconvenience, especially if they're eating their crops. So these are all things that go into the mix. And I'm here what we might call Hollywood adjacent. It's interesting. I saw, actually, you might have seen it in your feed in Oz. Harrison Ford was interviewed on CNN recently because he's coming out with the new Indiana Jones, the fifth one.
Yeah.
And he's very much of an environmentalist, and he was saying, in just for the sake of our short little lifetimes, we're ruining a planet that's been here for 4 billion years. I mean, who do we think we are? So, yes, we're going into an era where we do, it's interesting that technological change, it seems like we invent technologies right before we need them for some crucial purpose. And I would, telephone, telegraph, but interstate transportation. But, I don't think it's coincidental at all within the global unconscious, if you will, that we invented the internet just at a time when we need to communicate globally, as you say, build community, as a necessity for survival as a species. Now, that was never true before. It was really never a necessity on that scale, and certainly not with the rapidity. There's the new movie about there have been a number of them about the the Manhattan Project and the development of the A-bomb, but the scientists who were involved in that research in New Mexico during the toward the end of the Second World War, they really did worry very seriously, because it was really all theoretical at that point. What would happen with the detonation? It might actually trigger a chain reaction in the atmosphere that would incinerate the entire planet. There were scientists who actually laid awake night worried about this. Now, I was listening to a podcast just the other day. They were talking about GMO and GMO corn. And, again, science seems like it's safe, seems like it might be beneficial for feeding the planet. But the scientist who is on said, well, genetic engineering, gene splicing, actually that technology is so accessible now, they're probably going to be giving these kits to high school science labs. And he said any high school kid might be able to unleash something that would, ready, destroy the planet. So, and I think, frankly, that, there's been a lot of discussion worldwide, not just here, about political movements that are potentially authoritarian. And I think one of the reasons is it's not at its core primarily racial or even ethnocentric or geocentric. I think it has to do with fear of change. Is that people want a strong leader who just says, stop the world we want to get off. Well, let's just slow down for a generation. We don't need all this. We don't need all these threats. Well, I'll just make the bad man go away. Well, of course, he won't make the bad man go away. He'll just be a bad man himself. But
yeah,
the history of authoritarianism is not particularly happy.
No, it's never been from that perspective. That authoritarianism has been never last very long time. Does tremendous damage, and then I mean, you just look at someone like Hitler, and how much damage that had happened as a result of that. But from that perspective, if we take that, because I love how you weaved in your character there, and your character was uncertain about, as you said, the agnostic preacher is uncertain about his faith. How much of that is about creating that drama? Is that uncertainty creates that excitement of what's going on? Because as we were talking about, you mentioned about the Oppenheimer movie, where the scientists are they were laying awake going, we don't know what's going to happen. How much of that is really important for creating that drama and telling a good story?
Well, every student of screenwriting, which I was for a time as well, knows you need an engine of drama. Which in terms of fiction actually is an answer to the age-old question: why is there evil in the world? Well, there's reason. There's evil in drama, because, as one screenwriting instructor said, no one wants to watch The Village of the Happy People. It's and one might be a bit more serious and say, well, why does God permit imperfection? Maybe we won't go so far as to say evil. It's like, well, there needs to be an engine of creativity. I mean, if we are static, we're not human, we're not evolving. We're all, I think, regardless of what your religion is, you can certainly posit that we are imperfect. By definition, okay? And so if we have any ability to change or evolve, or even to make our lives interesting and edifying, at least to ourselves, then there has to be this engine of change. There has to be I see this wrong, I want to make this right. And from a technical standpoint, from the standpoint of simply being a writer of mystery thrillers, and the Preacher series is that. I have written in other genres, but from a writer's technical standpoint, the character of Preacher Evan Wycliffe is very convenient because many mysteries are police procedurals. It's the checklist of what the investigator, the cop, has got to go through in order to solve the crime. And the police procedure, first sequence, here's a dead body, how did it get there, and who's responsible for it? You spend the next 90 minutes trying to find out. Well, I'm not an investigator. I'm a researcher, I'm a data driller, but I'm certainly not a criminologist. And so I don't know enough. I'm not a retired FBI agent or a policeman. I don't know enough about police procedure to write about it. And I'm not really willing to do enough research to try to rival, their expertise. I mean, that would be maybe another degree in criminology. But if I have an agnostic minister, as it were, I have the genre, by definition, of what you would call an amateur sleuth. And an amateur sleuth like me doesn't know the procedure. All he has is curiosity, and it also happens that Evan Wycliffe knows how to use a computer keyboard. His day job before he became a guest preacher was he was a skip tracer for the local car dealer. So he would track down people, which is a lot easier to find, these days. Is just now that there's cell phones and no privacy. So he's a curious mind, and he's got a certain amount of investigative skills. And I think the thing that makes it interesting also, putting it in rural southern Missouri, where my forebears are from. I visited there as a boy. I learned, some of the skills of the farm back then, but I never actually lived there for very long. But
Mm.
I did learn to kind of appreciate that. I'm more of a vegetarian these days, but back then we used to say we ate everything on the pig but the squeal. I mean, this is an agricultural community, but
Yes.
putting it in small town Missouri,
Mm.
or Missouri, if you're from there, you say Missouri.
Mm.
Putting it there, if you think about the role of a minister, of a pastor,
Mm-hmm.
and he doesn't begin as a pastor, but he gets by the time Preacher Raises the Dead, which is the third in the series, comes along, yes, he has reluctantly stepped into that role because COVID has broken out as well.
Mm.
And the existing minister his mentor has retired, really feels he can't handle it. So Evan's a minister now, but the thing about this role, which has been true since the very first book in the series, people come to him for advice when no one else in the community will care. So the sheriff thinks it's a cold case. I mean, in the first book in the series, Preacher finds a corpse. Evan finds his best friend shot dead in a cornfield. He's just back east where he went to school. He's come home and his mother's passed away already. His father is on his last legs, and he's really looking about to, okay, maybe I can get some money as a guest minister because I do kind of know, I know my theology, I know my Bible. Some of these people in town know me. Maybe they'll flip me $50 for a sermon. And then I know the local car dealer Zip Zed. There actually is a car dealer in Appleton City, Missouri, Zinc Motors. I didn't want to use the real name because I was thought that it's such a small town everybody would know. But Zip Zed owns Zed Motors, and Evan works for him, and so that's really how he backs into investigations, if you will, is somebody's got a heartache, a problem, a missing person. They aren't necessarily all murders. This isn't Agatha Christie and everybody will be rounded up in the last scene around the dinner table. and then the finger finally pointed at the one you never knew.
Yeah.
But he's always got a mustache in the movies.
He's stuck in the 80s, is that right?
A thin mustache.
Oh, okay.
I'm
thinking of the magnificent men in their flying machines. Then when you get that thing,
well, again,
I'm older than I look. I remember this kind of stuff. So
we invented hot air balloons as a necessity, and then unfortunately decided to fill them with hydrogen. That was the Hindenburg. And
yes.
Oh, by the way, now they're going to fill cars with that. How is that different?
Yeah. Not only that, those molecules are tiny and can, they escape through things and need a lot of maintenance to.
Nobody's explained that to me. I don't know about that technology. Mine is actually a hybrid now.
Yes,
and I didn't really trust either the gas prices or the electrical grid. I thought maybe I should have a stake in both.
I think from what I understand of the grid in the US, it's not that reliable from what we hear. But then again, you never really know from the media. You hear all these different stories. I remember during COVID.
It has gotten more unreliable in recent years. And of course, part of that has to do with, again, especially in their urban areas, and especially in the southern and western regions, where the temperatures can get up. It's quite uncomfortable unless you have whole house air conditioning. And so that is a huge electrical demand. And I mean, a person couldn't live in Palm Springs. I mean, you're talking about up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit just in a normal summer. And those are the temperatures they're having in Texas now. Now, Texas had, and these may be some of the news reports that you saw, Texas had a real critical capacity problem because, again, probably because of the oil lobby in Texas, which is entrenched. They privatized their electrical distribution system. So and remember, we also had the Enron scandal years and years ago, not that long ago, but the whole idea that electrical capacity, and then also now that we've got energy credits, now that we've got what amounts to cap and trade, which is actually what Enron was founded to do, was that polluters would buy coupons, in effect, that would then create revenue that the government would, or some broker would, hand back to producers of solar and wind to subsidize their initial higher energy costs. Because of course, with a brand new wind farm, your startup costs are going to be huge compared to, it's not going to pay itself off in the first year. Well, if some of these credits could come back and the government could subsidize your early years, then as you start becoming more competitive, over time, those wind farms are going to be practically free electricity compared to what it costs to, suck crude oil out of the ground. So, and I think in general, seriously, the oil industry in the United States appreciated that sooner or later, and there were even debates years ago about when will it run out, when will we pump all the wells dry, and not only pumping them dry, but maybe just pumping them dry enough that it's just so too expensive to pump out the last drop.
Yeah.
Well, the energy industries understood this. They just thought it would take about 100 years to make the transition, and meanwhile they would be like not laughing all the way to the bank, but they'd be, happy in their investments. And the fact that it has happened so rapidly, from the standpoint of urgency, if you will. I mean, I don't think there was really any sense of urgency back when this was first understood, 1960s, 70s, 80s. But now, of course, it's just like we should have done everything yesterday, which is still impossible. And perhaps it will take us the next 100 years, and who knows what the Earth will look like in that length of time. But I mean, I do think we'll get there, just as I think that raising cattle will become economically completely impractical in terms of both water use, land use, and labor expense and manufacturing costs and all that. It's like, when a beefsteak costs you $1,000, you'll probably be willing to try something else.
Economics always plays a big factor, doesn't it?
Right, but I mean, I've got friends who are extremely upset about the morality today of that type of consumption, and I'm very much in sympathy with them. But again, as I say, I'm not a young kid, and I did spend my entire life in a different nutritional program. I've definitely tried to eliminate those products from my diet, but I would say it's selfishly, it's just as much about my personal concern for my personal health and my bank account as it is, morality. Although, I'll defend not quite to the death your right to preach against the moral aspects of it. And actually, there's some mention of these issues in the preacher books, because Evan is there in a farm community.
Yeah,
and that's one of the things that's happened in that community is it's absolutely no longer practical to grow corn. Corn is so prevalent partially because of GMO technology, but it's not only prevalent, so abundant, but it takes a lot of land, it takes a lot of water, and it's a very competitive industry, and it probably won't be used as ethanol as automotive fuel that much longer. And even now, by law, I think it's only like 11%, something like that. So you're in an environment where cattle also used to be a big part of Missouri agriculture, no more. That's centralized, and so you've got them up in Calgary, you've got them in Montana, you've got them you still have them in Texas, but Missouri farming is really relatively small scale farming, because Missouri is like Minnesota. There's a lot of lakes, a lot of hills and green country. So, okay, soybeans, peanuts, some are even saying bee culture Okay, but of course, some people think we shouldn't be. I mean, number one, we need to replenish the bees so that things get fertilized. But then again,
Without the bees,
are
we're in a lot of trouble.
are we somehow exploiting these poor, dear little charming creatures? Which is might be a bit of a stretch, but I can see the point. Is that we've lived for centuries with that biblical notion, if you will, that everything was put on earth to serve us, and I think that even the most conservative folks will say that's a relatively self-serving and even self-destructive attitude to have.
Yeah, well, there's a wider philosophy that we do need to take care of things as well. That we need to just not.
Yes, it's all a matter of
whether it's here to serve us,
yeah.
but not at the detriment to the entire world. Otherwise, the world ceases to exist. Well, the world probably won't. The world will still exist. We might not exist on it.
The world will, again, even according to the scientists, will perish
eventually
when the sun explodes.
Exactly.
And they've got actually a prediction for the sun explode, but it's extremely unlikely that anyone like us will be living on the planet at that time. We will either have colonized other places and be, knocking around the universe, or we will have perished long ago. So that's not to say the Earth won't be this lovely jewel, but I mean, climate change is a fact, whether it happens to be warming and whether it happens to be because of humans or not. I mean, you have only to look at the geologic record and see, sooner or later some meteor is going to impact, and you've got the new dark ages, or there's going to be. I mean, the Earth's crust is relatively thin, and what's there beneath the surface is a boiling soup of lava that all the continents are kind of sliding around. Now we're just kind of used to the Earth being the way it is. But I mean, if you notice on a world map how if you move the continents together, they kind of fit together. That's no coincidence. Okay, it took geologists a long time to figure that out. I mean, one of the things that really, I won't say that it amuses me. It strikes me as remarkable that when I was in school, grade school, say, okay, right after the World War II, the biggest universe that even our enlightened teachers could teach us about was the solar system. Maybe a little bit beyond there.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you've seen the app on Facebook, but there's an app that starts with a close-up of like your town on the Earth, and then it zooms back and back and back and back, and it just keeps going. It keeps going until actually there's the stellar map of everything we know about in the universe.
I think I have seen that, yeah, or something of that version. Yeah, it just keeps getting.
Well, if you want to be depressed about how insignificant you are, that's a good way to do it.
Depressed is the word I'd use.
I have friends who are evangelicals who sincerely believe that this is the only planet where God's word was operating, and the only place that Jesus ever visited, and the only place that this whole story unfolded. And that's just showing you the huge magnitude of everything that was created just for you. Now, I have a little bit of trouble with that, but I'm not going to shout anybody down who believes it, unless they're going to try to say you can't teach cosmology or astrophysics in school, because I think that would be a disservice to all the kids who are going to strap their butts into a rocket ship and follow Elon Musk to wherever, I mean, actually what's going to happen first, and this is kind of interesting, especially since, Australia's, as I know, you probably have got more mining operations than any place in the world besides Africa.
Yeah, there's a lot of mining. We have a lot of natural resources, that's for sure.
But know where your competition is going to come from? It won't be Africa, it's going to be asteroids. The asteroids are all heavy metal. So platinum and the stuff that you need for car batteries, cobalt, lithium, nickel, all that's in abundance up there. And so, one
Well,
of
they
the
can
NASA
make batteries.
programs,
They've got sodium batteries, and there's no shortage of sodium. They're just not as energy dense as lithium.
well, and that's one of the things, Damien. If we have those solar panels, or if we have those mature wind farms, what happens when electricity is free? There won't
I
be a
watch Star Trek. What
petrodollar
about when we have
anymore.
the energy conversion, when we can convert stuff from one thing to another? That's a free. I mean, what happens to the economy then?
All those theories about all those papers they took from Tesla's hotel room, yes. but my point being, I mean, going back to sodium and sodium is that sodium would be a direct byproduct of evaporating the sea for water, for water purification. And if you have unlimited electricity, guess what? You've got unlimited water.
Yeah.
So I mean that problem goes away too.
Well, what does
because
that say
right now,
that the amount of energy
expensive.
that hits the planet, that's not the energy put out by the sun, but the energy that hits the planet, I think that it would power there's enough energy that hits a planet in a moment to power the entire Earth several times over in that instant.
Well, I mean, the energy
that's what's hitting the planet. That's not the energy that's there.
The energy in the gas tank of our cars is the sunlight that was converted by the bodies of a very small portion of the dinosaurs that lived on the planet,
exactly
that length of time ago. So that's I mean, you talk about a minor miracle. But that's the thing. That's the thing with
what we're talking about here. There's so many different, and what I'm wondering, because I know that when you look at the news and things like that, there's so much polarization out there, which again is drama on itself. When you're writing a book, if we want to jump back in that. Can we jump in the Wayback Machine? And you might remember this as a silver DeLorean that Doc Brown invented in Back to the Future, and you can hit 88 miles an hour, and we can travel through time. Do you want to jump in the driver's seat of that and hit 88 miles an hour? Let's talk about how we get to this, because there's so many different topics we covered there that could make a great story. How did you get into writing, and what are the elements that make, what drove you to want to write those fiction stories?
Well, I think that all the time, from the time that I could, well, maybe even before I could actually write, I was very much a storyteller. I was always not telling jokes so much, but I mean, telling stories on the playground, at school. I wasn't really so much outgoing as I was just anybody who would listen. I'd run on at the mouth as I'm doing now, that kind of thing. But when I was in 4th grade, I wrote an essay for the Kansas City Library Essay Contest.
Mm-hmm. Why
most people like Tom Sawyer. So I won 2 tickets to the Wizard of Oz musical. That was my first award. 2 years later, I won a Scholastic Magazine's contest for a short story, The Mayor's Secretary, which actually was very much ahead of its time. This was in the early days. This was like in the late 50s, and IBM computers were just being used in business. And I wrote a story about the mayor of a city who hired a robot to be his secretary and regretted it. So that was way ahead of its time.
Yeah, Elon would like to hear that story.
my dad was very much a scientist. He was a chemical engineer, and he wanted me to be a research scientist. And I did follow that path for a while. And the family was also very devout Baptist, and so then for a while I was a student minister as well. So that kind of explains both sides of Evan's brain. But when I was in high school, I got into okay, yeah, I think I would rather write than be involved in science. And maybe it was because I lost the first place in the science fair. So big ego, I guess. But in college, I was I did undertake the College of Letters at Wesleyan University, which is very much a thinker's program, somewhat like Oxford PPE program, and writing was very much part of it. I spent a year in Paris, struggling my way through the French language, which I still do. And when I got out of college, actually, I'd wanted to minor in theater, and I studied it. And actually, I did some acting, but the problem was I got ill my last year of school, which had the benefit, if you will, of keeping me out of the army, which would have put me in Vietnam at the time. But then also, I wasn't able to get the double major with theater that I wanted. And I auditioned for Juilliard, didn't get in, and I thought, and I suppose I would have been persistent, but I wasn't. And so I went into advertising, as many people do. So I wrote advertising copy, and then I was involved in corporate filmmaking, educational filmmaking. And then from there, actually, I got very much involved in the early days of computer graphics, and I got involved in the programming and the internals of it, the real geeky technical aspects of it. And that work experience actually, I was in Detroit at the time, we were working with the car companies, and that economy melted down. And I just simply decided, I just wanted to, I want to live in Hollywood. I want to write screenplays. I want to be a filmmaker. So just up and moved. But I needed a way to, once I was here, I would need a way to support myself. I moved without visible means of support. So actually, I got involved in writing a series of college textbooks. I was a senior editor on a series of very serious college textbooks in the computer science area, one of the early series that was part of that major. And so I think the staff produced about 15 volumes of that, including the very first book written on computer auditing. And then I started writing technical engineering articles for white papers, and I would write those, and I would get a very hefty fee for one scientific article. So I supported myself, again, still freelance. And it was the computer background that helped me have the chops or the cred to be able to sit down with an engineer and talk, equations and, schematics and all that kind of stuff. And along about that time, I was recruited by a literary agent who happened to specialize primarily in business and technical books. Now, this was the same agent who had begun the Dummies series, the Chicken Soup series, the Idiot's Guides. And so I wrote many of those under contract. I probably wrote more than 30 business and technical books. And one of them is still on the shelves today. It's called How to Lie with Charts. And it's taught at Georgetown.
That's sold to a lot of government organizations, I would imagine.
If they're lying to you, it might be my fault. Actually, a few years ago, I added a couple of new chapters to just freshen the content. And the two new chapters are 11 Ways to Make Fake News and Use and Abuse of Metadata. Okay, so I mean, those were both ahead of their times, and actually they've now been published as little separate booklet. You can actually buy those books separately now if you don't want to spend for the whole textbook. So that's in the White Collar Migrant Workers series that I wrote, which is basically how to be a consultant, how to give yourself a job in the gig economy, which I think is really quite relevant and important. So, but it was really only, I would say it was probably about 15 years ago, and I had something of a shift in my priorities, and I said to this agent, I think and I will say also during this time, I had actually studied screenwriting. I studied at screenwriting at UCLA with some of the prominent mentors, and I was very serious. Here I was in Los Angeles, and I had this whole closet full of spec scripts, and
Yeah.
going through one rejection after another. And I said to this agent, I'd like you to represent me for fiction. I'd like you to take out my screenplays and pitch my novels. And his reply was, "Have a nice life." So this is what actually kind of forced me into self-publishing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, the rest is history. I have my own imprint, La Puerta Books and Media, and I have self-published all the books that I have. I have about 20 titles in my on my book list now, and those are fiction and nonfiction, but mostly fiction. And of those, there's the Preacher Evan Wycliffe series, which is a series of 3 books, soon to be 4. I'm working on the 4th. Preacher Stalls the Second Coming is actually the 4th title.
Ooh.
And that might be blasphemous or predictive or whatever, but also a series of romantic comedies I did. And by the way, are you following HBO in Oz these days?
I think it is around. I don't watch it myself, but yeah.
Okay.
I know of HBO, but yeah. And there's a lot of the stuff that's on there that streams into different streaming channels here.
There's an HBO series that recently premiered and just did have its last episode. I think it was only limited series of 5 episodes, called The Idol.
Oh, okay.
And it's about a young, extremely attractive, sexy pop singer she's something
Sounds
of with the wig.
And then I woke up.
Right. We're not getting into that part of it. I have an intern who went through the transition, unannounced, went through the transition to trans while he was working for me. So I actually can speak to that subject too. But this character, Jocelyn, is her stage name, and she's something of a newbie Beyonce. She's a hip hop star, but she's going through a personal crisis, and she hasn't become a legend yet, but she certainly wants to be, and she's made a ton of money. So The Idol is really about her struggles with her management, her artistic doubts, this Svengali character who may be using her or maybe simply trying to challenge her. Well, as it happens, before this came out, my most recent book is called Mick and Moira and Brad, and it's a Hollywood insider story about a young woman who, it is dissimilar in many ways, but it is similar in that this young woman has been a prosecutor. She's got a law degree.
Okay.
She's an aggressive, feminist, out there character. She's got no fear. But she studied classical opera. I mean, does this have a bit of a vibe of science, religion, theater, literature? Okay, well, I'm interested in these characters that do one thing for their day job and another.
Well, that juxtaposition creates an interesting character as well.
Yes, of course, and because are you living your dream or are you living somebody else's dream? And that every writer asks that question. But in the case of Moira, she can't help. About the only place that she sings is in the shower.
Oh.
And her boyfriend,
any place
Brad,
I should sing, but I don't. I torture people.
Her boyfriend, Brad, is a hedge fund manager.
Yeah.
Who also happens to be her tennis doubles partner.
Oh.
And he brings her over to the club and says, there's this rich couple that, they sincerely covet the club title, and they're not as good as you are. I know you were on the UCLA team, but I want to play them because I need their portfolio. Just try not to be too good. Now, he should have known that saying that to a feminist is like, losing deliberately.
I'm thinking Spain here with some red rags to a bull.
Losing deliberately is definitely an oxymoron. Okay.
Yeah.
So But the thing is, after, and she does lose graciously, although her mistakes that look like lucky shots
I
are deliberate.
struggle, losing full stop, let alone graciously.
Well, every now and then she wants to show off, but she does match
I love
point,
it.
okay?
That's
But
awesome.
she's in the shower and she's singing from La Traviata.
Okay.
I mean, she's bel canto. She's which I actually did study as an actor, so I mean, I know a little bit about Hollywood. I know a little bit about opera. Okay, but so she's singing in the shower. Well, this other half of the power couple, who's been on the other side of the devil's net, she says, my husband and I, we support the opera. We've got seats in Founders Circle. She says, you've got an incredible set of pipes. She said, we've got to exchange numbers. She said, oh, I couldn't do any of that. I mean, I hope you understand this is just a hobby of mine. She said, oh, you should meet my friend Mick. Well, Mick is a high-powered, I mean, I'm talking about ultra-high-powered Hollywood agent. He's a vice president of what they call a packaging agency.
Yeah.
So a packaging agency books not only the star, but the director, the music director, the choreographer, the scenarist, all this. Well, it just so happens that poor Mick is in big trouble, as one producer that I knew in Hollywood actually was. Is his star has canceled on him with very relatively short notice in advance of a stadium concert that's going to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, the venue happens to be Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Berlin. That's only 17,000 people. I mean, SoFi's got 70,000, but that's still a lot. You don't put a newbie in front of that audience, okay? Yeah. But the thing is that the fellow that I knew here actually a star canceled on him. I don't know how far out it might have been. I mean, these things take a lot of time to put together, major tour, world tour. But I mean, it was considerably in advance, but not far enough to really book somebody else. And so that was a lawsuit that dragged out in the courts for quite a long time. But in the case of my story, because I understood how much liability the agency has for non-performance to the investors, Mick reasons that, she can sing. And he kind of tricked her into audition. She didn't know she was auditioning because she thought she was there because they thought they might get sued. She thought she was there as an attorney, right? Yeah. He says, but actually, Bitsy says you can sing some opera. Why don't you just humor me? Okay. So then he realizes she's got nerve, she's got talent. If she just steps out on that stage, we don't get sued. Okay. Now she might suck, she might go down in flames, but hey, we don't have to book her for the second night, or well, not the second night, but the rest of the tour. So that's really the story of Mick and Myra and Brett, is this love triangle where they're actually 9 weeks out. And I studied particularly Cher's farewell tour. Now that wasn't her latest, the farewell tour was supposed to be farewell, but it wasn't. She came back, hundreds of $1 million will bring somebody back. But one of the things that I noticed, and Cher's a talented dancer, I know. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from her, but one of the things that I realized, and I know this also from my theatrical training, is that a star doesn't necessarily need to be a dancer if there's a lot of dance in the show. If you watch Cher's flamenco number from the farewell tour, a platform raises her 2 stories above the stage. There's a staircase, and ripped male flamenco dancers join her at the top amidst, swathed in smoke. Yes. The flamenco, and then there's flamenco guitars. So they start another number. Well, the men are circling her, and these are real flamenco dancers. These guys have all the moves, okay? She's doing step, step, stop, step, step, turn, step, step, stop. And so what Myra's choreographer tells her, who happens to be Maasai warrior, because I know about Kenya, of course, and the Maasais are dancers.
Yeah.
Her choreographer says, Myra, she says, what if I make a wrong step? If you make a wrong step, your lead dancer, who's on your right, will see you take the wrong step, and he will step that way. And if he steps that way, the whole entourage will step that way. They're trained.
Yeah.
Okay. So your audience is going to think you are leading them. They are following you. But in fact, it's exactly the reverse.
Yes.
So and
they're good followers.
I did see, and this actually highlighted in the book. I did see Kirk Douglas perform in his 92nd year after his stroke. I saw him in a one-act memoir play.
Yeah. And
they put 2 easy chairs on either end of the stage, and there was a big screen in the middle. And it was like, it was a series of monologues, and the monologues would be punctuated by clips, from his life, pictures, and family album, whatever. Well, those clips would cue him, certainly, but if he ever lost his place, I began to realize the director, who might have been his son Michael, I don't remember who actually directed that production, but I think his instruction was, if you think you're going to go up on a line, just sit in the nearest chair and have a think, relax, because we'll roll a clip.
How much of that applies in life from that perspective? Because a lot of times we look at people like yourself. You've published a bunch of books. Now, I would imagine from that perspective, you didn't have the thought process of this is all going to be successful, everything's going to go to plan. I'm sure there's things that come out of left field you had to deal with. You had, as you said, you wrote a number of corporate books to provide income. How much of the perception do we have that everything is, when we look at someone like you said, Cher, they're going, oh, what wonderful dancer, but not understanding the full mechanics behind that actually you can actually do that too. How much of that limits people getting out there and giving it a go, do you think?
Well, the Lakers basketball, or is it Maple Leafs hockey saying you miss 100% of the shots you don't take? So I mean, if you want a disappointed life, not trying is a guarantee of being disappointed. With your last breath. Okay, but
give it that certainty.
Damon, you've hearkened actually on my favorite speech about writing, and that is that the contrast that I draw is that when I was writing for hire, writing business and technical books, and working with traditional publishers, I had to submit an outline and a sample chapter to start a project. Usually it was on a topic that was assigned. I mean, they might have thought I had some expertise, which is why I got, assigned.
Yeah.
But the first thing that they do after they approve your outline and you go to contract is they give you an in-house editor. Well, you've got someone to guide your steps. That's one of the reasons why nonfiction is submitted as an outline. Fiction is submitted as an entire manuscript, because no fiction writer knows that they're actually ever going to finish any given work. Okay, no publisher wants to take the well, if you're a bestseller, they might take the chance, but even with the big ones, and Tyler missed a couple of deadlines, and I think she eventually delivered, although we don't know what was on the cutting room floor, as it were. But I will say seriously, when you've got an editor looking over your shoulder, number one, you've got an outline, you've got a roadmap. And it's not only an approved roadmap, it becomes at that point, it's contractual. It's a mandatory roadmap. If you depart from that roadmap, you have to say, Mother, may I, to the editor, and they might even have to present it to the editorial board to let you put in this chapter that might be on a topic they don't really want you to cover, or that they think is going to be too perishable. Now, my first fiction novel, My Inflatable Friend, which is a romantic comedy, I adapted from an unsuccessful screenplay, one that I'd shopped all over town. So yes, I had an outline, and that was something that I had a roadmap. I had something that I could flesh out.
Mm.
And I did do a few that way. But as I got more proficient with long form fiction writing, especially as I got into mysteries,
Mm-hmm.
I began to realize that it always worked out better if I didn't know where I was going when I set out.
Right.
And that has to do with a certain amount of self-confidence, if you will. And, you know, if I had a few books on the shelf, and I had a readership, and it was like, you know, well, I could quit this if I need to, if it's just going nowhere. I'll start something else, and it won't be my last one. But one of the things that I realized was that if you allow your creative unconscious to engage, you will find yourself putting things on the page and you don't really know why. They may just seem like extraneous details or things that you put in for what you'd call color. You know, you're describing the things on a desktop. John le Carré is great at this. You know, George Smiley is snooping around somebody's desk because, you know, when they're not there, because he's trying to piece together the fellow's background in his life. Okay. And the thing about Smiley is he can remember absolutely everything on the desk and exactly where it was put.
Right.
Well, when you're a writer and you add a piece of detail like that, it just astounded me how much suddenly there would come a point in the plot 2 chapters later, and that thing on that table would be really useful to use that for this. Okay, so the pieces would begin to fit together. And the last few mysteries that I've done, I mean, my beta readers, some of whom were not my best friends, said, you know, I literally didn't know what was going to happen until the last page. And then I confessed and I said, you know something, I didn't either. And my philosophy being there is if I can delight myself by surprising myself, then hopefully that's an experience that I can create for you. You know, I know, you know, the very first thing you learn, even as a professional writer, is, kid, give me a new idea that stood the test of time. You know, give me a new experience that's completely proven. And, you know, in Hollywood, it's the old, well, this is like Adam's Rib, but it's with, you know, a hedge fund manager and and his girlfriend who's an attorney or something, you know, so it's a new spin. It's an updated thing because the roles are different now. I mean, you can't write a pre-code Hollywood movie anymore, even though they were incredibly sophisticated and they were mostly about cheating on spouses. But even as sophisticated as those movies were, you can't write some of them today because the sex roles have changed. The women are still mostly secretaries. The African American people are still mostly house servants. I mean, you can't you couldn't take that script and shoot it today. You know, you have to. But the other thing that I found, and again, this is where you could say, okay, the spirits wanted me to learn how to be an actor so I could be a better writer. Everything that I learned in scene study, improvisation, character analysis, dramatic structure, screenplay writing structure, everything I learned in those roles informs my writing such that, and it helps this unconscious impetus in that one. And I'm not the first writer to say this. When you create characters and you clothe them and you shove them up on the stage of your novel, once they're endowed, they often tell you what they want to say. You know, you write their cue and their response, this response that suddenly you realize you have to type, is not what you were expecting. The character wants to go in the direction that they want to go, and that's because they're true to their motivations. They're true to, and just as an actor is true to their motivations on stage. And when I acted, it was interesting. One of the things that I learned, which was somewhat amusing, is if you're not an actor or you're not trained in the theater, you kind of have this notion that actors memorize their scripts.
Yeah.
That if they were just coming off a performance, you could sit them down and say, just recite your lines for me.
Yeah.
An actor can't do that. An actor doesn't know how to do that. The only thing an actor knows, just as all of us as human beings know, is stimulus response.
Yeah.
An actor knows, what is my cue? Well, if you give me your cue, I know what to say. And so actually what you know is a series of one-liner jokes, if you will. The other cue, which is the other cue, which is perhaps acting at the next level, is a competent director in transforming the written page to the stage, has to put the story within the physical space. He has to use the physical space in a believable way, but he also has to put the actors through that space in a way that's consistent with their motivations, actions, and the events that are called for in the script. Well, this is the term in theater is blocking. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things you'll notice is that an actor knows what they're supposed to say by the cue that they get, or the blocking by where they happen to be standing on the stage at the time. If I'm standing by the coffee table, I'm supposed to take the drink from his hand and say this.
Yes.
Okay. If the other actor forgets his blocking and doesn't take you there, or doesn't hand you the drink, you'll blow your line.
Yes.
And this is where the accomplished actors, often you'll hear actors say, "Oh, he gave so much to me." Speaking of the other actor, speaking of the back and forth, is that audiences, really accomplished actors, do occasionally improvise within published stage plays, because they know how to cover their mistakes, because both of them know if they've forgotten something, they both have a strong sense of where they're supposed to get to.
That's a big point.
We know we have to get back to that coffee table because that's where I hit him.
How much of that, when you're talking about?
So he's going to say, don't you need some sugar in that coffee?
From the writing perspective, where you're talking about that knowing where you need to go, how much of that is important from your perspective of when you're creating the story, that you're getting to a certain outcome? And as you said, the characters, if you know the character well, the character's responding to that situation. When you're writing, you're responding to the situation as the character. So that kind of flows. How much of it is important to have that objective as to where you're going and keep that objective clear in your mind?
Well, I often have a sense of where I want it to end up, although not always.
Right.
But in those cases, at the very least, I usually have a sense of what is it that I want to talk about, or what is it that I want to investigate. Not as an investigator, but as a human being. What do I want to look into? Okay. In the case of Preacher Finds a Corpse, my maternal uncle actually had died by suicide.
Okay.
Under similar circumstances in that part of the world. And it was always very much a mystery how that had occurred, what that motivation was, who was involved. And, my story was written to perhaps as an extended therapy session. I mean, it's loosely inspired by a true story. I'd be the last person, especially among my family, to say this is what I think happened. But I wanted to know, it was pretty clear that it was a suicide. But the question that I would have the preacher ask himself is driving someone to suicide murder? It's certainly a sin. Okay. Is standing on a dais and whipping up an angry mob in a frenzy, and then advocating violence. What is the guilt associated with that? Because we have this thing called free speech. People are free, people are free, presumably, to act on their impulses or not. We are, in a court of law. It's no excuse that the so-called insanity defense is, you have to literally, your lawyer has to literally prove you did not know the difference between right and wrong when you struck. I mean, the McMahon rule. But we're finding that there are all kinds of degrees on that. I mean, you could say, and this was true in the former Soviet Union, is people who were dissenters, serious dissenters. It wasn't that they were necessarily imprisoned because they were political prisoners, although presumably many of them were. But within the mindset of at least the Soviet system, simply holding a position that is contrary to the accepted standards of the community is itself, by their definition, mental illness. This is what justified your being committed to a mental institution rather than a prison, which once you got inside had, no practical difference.
Yes.
Okay. Except that for the mental institution, the judge didn't need a term of sentence. You can't you can't necessarily say, oh, well, you're supposed to be in the sanitarium for 3 years, because at the end of 3 years, perhaps you haven't been cured. Perhaps your attitude is no better. So it's much more likely, if injustice is to be practiced, for example, it's much more unjust to throw someone in a mental institution and throw away the key than it is to send them to prison with at least the hope of being heard by a parole board. So, this whole idea of guilt, if I'm going to explore guilt, if I'm going to explore personal responsibility, and this comes back to what, you began the broadcast with talking about, the need to build not only relationships, but the need to build community.
Yeah.
And I'm a strong believer that storytelling builds community.
Yeah.
And that's true whether you're an investigative journalist, whether you happen to be standing, if I were standing in front of the Santa Monica City Council, okay, my wife had a grassroots campaign called Unleash the Beach. Yeah. She wanted it to be legal to take your dogs onto the sand, which, is a $400 ticket now.
Yeah.
And so to argue that, to advocate that, just as it would be in court in front of the city council, you only got 3 minutes. The best way to do that is to tell them a story.
Yeah.
I was on the beach the other day. There was, it was a cold morning. There are no swimmers. The lifeguards aren't even there. And one of the things my dogs just love is to run in the surf.
Yeah.
So here's a story,
And that's where, from that perspective, if the stories are so important for society, and that drama, in a useful way, can be very, very helpful. How would you,
absolutely,
for someone that wants to do this? Obviously, there's a passion and a big commitment to doing it. It's not something you're just going to fall into and suddenly be great at. What are some of the realistic steps that you would advise people that want to write, so the steps that they should take?
Well, I think that the first step is an urge to see, either an urge or a perception of the need to see some situation from the perspective of someone who's not yourself. And this is the same, if I were Joaquin Phoenix and I'm trying to figure out how to play the Joker, I have to delve down into my psyche somehow. And I have to find that glimmer of what that character is inside myself and and amplify it. Now, yes, I may be using all kinds of technique to simulate the way that I've seen people like that behave if I can't reach that. But that's somewhat less authentic. And I do think that an actor and writers certainly as well, I think it's much less difficult to convince an actor that anybody is capable of anything. I think that it's very easy to march into that church and sit down and, listen to that lesson and say, there, but for the grace of God go I, I'd never do that. Well, if
that's
you,
pretty arrogant to say that.
if you hadn't eaten in 3 days and, your boss had not only threatened to dismiss you, but perhaps threatened you with physical retribution, put your, and I think that an excellent way to begin, people say short stories because yes, a short story often has a premise and its structure is not as complex. But, I mean, usually it does have a beginning, a middle, and an end. We are talking about Aristotle throughout act structure, whatever.
Yeah.
And, short films, same way. A short film often can be, in effect, an extended visual joke or an extended visual lesson. I saw a really masterful student film that was done a la Charles Chaplin, totally silent, with a young man who goes up to an automated teller machine, and he's clearly tired of his credit card being eaten by the machine. He absolutely wants that card back, even if he's declined.
Yeah.
So he's put a nylon string on his card.
Yeah.
And he goes up to the machine, puts the machine in, and of course the machine eats his card.
Yeah.
Well, now there follows another minute and a half of incredibly hysterical sight gags, pulling on that, having a wrestling match with that machine, trying to get his card back, and his leg over the string, hook it around the door and then around his neck. His neck gets caught in it. Okay, but the premise is so simple. So it's like,
but it's relatable as well. How important is that?
Yes, and everybody. But one of the most powerful writing lessons I ever had was I was in a mentorship program in filmmaking, and a producer came in and said, actually, I'd like you to do this. You all think of yourselves as writers. You have pads in front of you. I want you typing on your pads, on your devices. I want you writing on a pad. And she says, you've got 2 characters. One knocks on the other character's door. One has a secret and won't tell the other. And they're friends.
Yeah.
I want you to write for 2 minutes and don't take the pen off the paper. Write for 2 minutes. Well, I turned that into a book.
The stories can be anywhere, by the sounds of it.
It's a thought starter. And I will say that, and of course now there's actually an app called Quick Write that I use. I had a business client ask me for a business plan the other day, and I wasn't really, it'd been a while since I'd really seen one, seen that structure. And I could probably have spent a half an hour to an hour researching the net to try to find business plan templates. But I went into Quick Write, an AI program, and I said, write me a draft business plan. And so in about 30 seconds, I had the template, and I had, what you should probably say under each one. Now, I didn't keep any of those words except the headings. But just the idea of, if you don't know where to start, ask Bard where to start. It can be a tool as much as you're not plagiarizing. You're just simply using it. You might use Grammarly or some other tool to check your proofreading. Anybody who's a copy editor knows that you're not going to get 100% out of the AI bot, but it can sure save you some time if you go through and approve or disapprove each one of those choices and then run through it again.
Well, wasn't it Picasso is widely credited with good artists create, great artists steal?
Well, I had one
There is
fellow
not
who was
really.
an art dealer who told me his Picasso said on his deathbed there were only 3 original Picassos, and the that one painting of Vasquez
Mhm.
that's got the little princess standing there. I forgot the name of the painting, but evidently Picasso did 50 different versions of that particular painting.
Mm.
And
And isn't that part of that
and
uniqueness, when you bring it out, and this is for the people wanting to
well, the
write,
thing about
you're
Picasso,
bringing,
I think
sorry, go ahead.
he was such a competent imitator. I mean, as a technician, I think this is why he had all those different, the blue period, the cubism. He really was a masterful imitator of his peers, and also had an ego big enough to think he was better than any of them. But I think one of the challenges that he had was that once he'd done what they did better than they did, he didn't really know quite what to say.
Yeah.
And so he was a tortured man in many respects. I mean, I think if you actually met him in a bar, you might not like the fellow.
Isn't that true, though? You take that to the business world, you look at Steve Jobs, created amazing things that have changed the world in so many different areas. Yet a lot of people, credit him as being a complete prick.
Well, again, I'll go back to a Hollywood story. I knew a fellow who was a very successful writer producer, and he'd actually worked with some of the people who are studio heads now. And he said, actually, one of the things that you have to learn early on is, are you an attacker or are you an attractor? He's talking about Hollywood. And he said an attacker is somebody who, they might throw things, they might have a quick temper, they might be intimidating. And you just described a lot of the executives in this town. Well, one of the things about being an attacker is there actually is, at least historically, been some necessity for that, in that, yes, there are some who are not only attackers, but also rapists or at least molesters, and presumably comes with the personality type sometimes. But when you've got a star who's making $20 million a picture and they are throwing a hissy fit, acting like a baby, I don't think that talking to them nicely necessarily is going to bring them in line in time to shoot tomorrow. So there is a reason for that type of behavior.
Yes.
But this friend, the producer, he contrasted that with, but the attractors. He said, these are the people, and they're somewhat rarer, but these are people who are so talented, so committed, that, and you notice that they're always working with the same people over and over again, the people that they trust.
Yeah.
These are people who they attract talent to themselves, and those people will take a pay cut to work for them.
Yeah.
So we're talking Almodovar, we're talking Woody Allen, as long as he's behaving himself. But amazingly, we're talking about the senior Clint Eastwood, who was perhaps might have been considered something of an attacker, at least a bad boy in his early days, but in his senior years is somebody who is reputed to hire actors who are not only friends and colleagues, but whom he thinks are absolute masters, puts them in front of the camera, and sometimes he says, roll them, and he walks away. He doesn't watch this. So, yeah, we probably got this. I mean,
But isn't that part of that, again, that confidence too, and that comes through skill? There's three, and I put into three elements. There's the experience, which is, Clint Eastwood's done how many different movies, and not only that, when he was doing movies, he was always on the set, from what I understood, even though he wasn't in it. he was watching and learning.
He's
So
been on the other side of the camera. Yes,
Yeah.
he knows that role from
Mm.
the inside of that actor's skin. He can put himself there. And
Yeah.
he knows that, if he had Meryl Streep in front of the camera, he knows if that's a good take. I mean, okay, let's say he watches the take and he goes, damn good take. Okay.
Yeah.
He's not going to ask for another one unless she says, something she might say. Clint, I'd like to do it again. And there are actors who are either insecure and they're going to want 30 takes because something's wrong.
Yeah.
The makeup artist comes in after each one,
I've worked with people like that.
Or somebody like Meryl, who is, she's got so many parts of herself that she's discovered that she could use in this. It's like, okay, what if there's a classic example, actually, I just used the other day from the movie The Conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one line in there, and Gene Hackman plays this. He's a professional eavesdropper. He records conversations as an investigator. And the first time he hears this conversation, records it, the conversation is, he'd kill us if he got the chance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so he shares this with his girlfriend, who, then they get pulled into this plot of, well, maybe we should kill him before he kills us. But then later in the movie, he's going back over that same tape.
Yeah.
After he's become kind of estranged from her, he doesn't quite trust her anymore.
Mm.
And the way he hears it is, he'd kill us if he got the chance.
Mm.
So it's like, the shoe's now on, it's like, actually, this came out in my book, 11 Ways to Generate Fake News. It's, okay, switch the order of events.
Yeah.
Okay, you and I are in a bar, and the police get called, and it's like, you've got a bloody nose, and I've got blood on my fist. Okay. And the way that you tell the story is, he socked me in the face. And the way I tell the story is, he called my mother a bad name and I socked him in the face. Okay. So we have switched the order of events such that the perpetrator becomes the victim, the victim becomes the perpetrator. And so if you, and you'll note, we'll go back to politicians again. Politicians do this all the time. Is somebody who's notorious for a certain kind of bad behavior is very likely going to accuse their opponent of that behavior before the opponent has a chance to accuse them.
It's kind of like when you date a narcissist as well.
at the very least, the very least, his excuse is, well, he did it too. He did it first. I'm just leveling the playing field. So, and this is true. Also, I wrote a novel called Clifford Spiral about a fellow who actually kind of inspired by my own life and my experience. My father, who had a stroke, was that my main character is a fellow who's had a stroke and is trying to piece together his memories. Yeah. And he frankly can't remember the order of events. He knows this happened and that happened. Yeah. But did he throw the first punch, or was he simply defending someone? Okay. And so it makes a big difference. And if you find you thinking back over, and okay, we'll come at it from the standpoint of religion and the things that maybe you feel guilty about, or the things you blame yourself for. If you've ever been in therapy, you will find that one of the things your therapist may be aware of is like, well, are you sure that such and such didn't happen first? You told me about this other thing that was going on in your life. Was that happening at the same time that you did this? I mean, was this that caused you to be so depressed? Possibly this that made you lash out against this person? I mean, you don't seem like the kind of person that would do that all the time. Well, maybe in your mind, those events are disconnected. And you've been blaming yourself for being harsh, angry, not understanding. Again, we're going back to relationships here. You've been blaming yourself. Well, maybe either that person wronged you and you forgave them right away. You don't remember that. Okay. So I this is the thing that's wonderful about artistic expression, whether it be writing or acting or painting or whatever, or music, is that externalizing what's inside you is always therapeutic in some sense.
Yeah.
You may decide that you don't like that picture you painted, and you can throw it in the trash if you like.
Yeah.
Or if you don't like it, you could sleep on it. Again, with the unconscious, I am a big practitioner and believer in just ask yourself the question and sleep on it. You'll be amazed at how many times you see the answer in the morning. But yeah, sleep on it and look at that picture again. And it's like, how come I didn't see that in there before? That's news.
Yeah.
I have a I don't have it anymore, but I have this one painting I painted when I was in high school, and it was an image of a woman, and it was like on this side she was a brunette, close cropped. On this side she was a blonde, and then I realized that I was having conflicting feelings about
cool.
some of my neighbors. So
we've talked for a while now, and there's so much great stuff that's come out of this. For me, of this little inspirations that I've got out of this as we're doing it, and it's popped in my head and it's been very motivating. And I've got so many exciting things because I know you're in the evening, but I'm still in the just past lunchtime now, just past noon. So I've got the day, and so I'm supercharged with all the things that we've come. Oh, God, I can do this and do that. And what would be your key takeaway? Because we have to wind this up. What would be your key takeaway that you would like to share with the audience about moving forward as a writer or in life? I'll let you choose. But what would you want the audience to take away from this interview?
Well, I would say that it can be marvelous when, by whatever means, you find your voice.
Oh.
You find your authentic voice. And I'll give you an brief example from my life. When I was very young and this storyteller in grade school, I was told that I had a rather loud and irritating voice. The teachers would, and I was called Jerry back. Jerry, I can hear you above everybody else. Quiet down. And the thing that was interesting then was that as I got into adolescence, my voice softened. I got more timid, and I didn't raise my hand in class as often. Okay. And even as I got into business, I was initially afraid of answering the phone and just, Gerald Jones. It was Gerald speaking.
Yeah.
Okay. I was, and it wasn't until I started to do some radio, and also my voice was higher. Male voices go all over the place, but I even felt as though my voice was just a little bit too in the alto range. It was even above tenor, and I wanted it to be, more commanding. One of the things that I found, not only after I took voice lessons, but also when I got on the radio, I could hear my voice in the cans. And magically, after I started hearing my recordings, after I started hearing myself on the air, my voice got deeper. I found a register I didn't even know I could speak in. So it's not like, I'm the young Clint all the time, but it gives you a feeling of range. It gives you a feeling of, I could be this way, I could be that. I'm free to be however myself comes out. And I just think that that's a marvelous discovery. And you may find out that you are much more cynical than you thought. Well, there's this thing called noir.
Yeah.
Maybe you've got, or maybe you're far more humorous than you give yourself credit for. Comedy is really only an outlook.
Yeah.
So, so I would say, go there and delight in what you discover. So you may find out that you're a much more interesting person than you think you are.
I love that. Find your authentism. We call it authentism.
Authentism.
You're
We'll
authentic.
coin the word.
We're going to put some isms that have a positive spin on it.
You'll be on the authentic spectrum then.
Exactly. We need to be. We actually need to create that as a chart. Where are you on the authentic spectrum?
Put it on the wall, and then you've got a dart. It's like, who do I want to be today?
I did. Well, I love that wisdom though that you're talking about being authentic. Authentic. I did that in Toastmasters a little while ago. I was talking and I used the word speeching, and we had an area manager there or area director, whatever they're called there, and it just became. I used it a couple of times accidentally, and then other people started using it. Even the area director started using it, and not just in that meeting, but in follow-on meetings, people started using the word speeching. So maybe we might see authentic in the dictionary one day with authentic charts. But that's what I love what you're talking about is finding your voice. That's fantastic.
If you coin a term and you use it consistently, especially in fiction, the reader will get that it's a term of art. And a copy editor may want to take it out. And it was interesting. I was just reading one of Mark Twain's old stories the other day, the one about Hadleyville, because it was mentioned in someone's podcast, and there were a number of words in there that my spell checker, as I was reading, because I was reading it on the screen, my spell checker was flagging these as these aren't in the dictionary, and I thought, this is Mark Twain, okay, but he used it consistently.
Yeah,
and that's one of the things that my master copy editor tells me. He says, if you don't know how to punctuate that, just make sure you punctuate it the same way every time. I mean, maybe you could use that comma for a pause there, because it looks less gnarly than an ellipsis or a dash. Maybe you don't. I mean, again, as a stylist, if you know the rules, then if you break the rules it's not like you're flouting the rules.
Yeah.
It's like, how can I do this so that, and actually I had a film director that I worked with who said, have a reason for everything you do.
Yeah.
And this guy was he practiced that with such regularity that he really had a policy of never admitting that he was wrong about creative matters. And we did a project together, and I was sent a review copy, and the title was misspelled. And I called him and I said, the title is misspelled. They've already put out some copies. You know what his answer was? He says, that makes it collectible.
Love it. I love it. But I love what you're saying there about being true to yourself. Find your voice. Be you. Be authentic. I love it. That's awesome.
Jared, the only way that the only way that you know anything for sure is if you've recovered from that mistake.
Yeah.
Because if you read it in a book, maybe somebody else who wrote that book read it in a book. It's not necessarily.
Exactly.
It's not necessarily true.
Very true. Gerald, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. So much fun. I really, really love it. We'll put all the details for your books in the show notes as well. But if there's anywhere you want people to contact you, do you want to put them in now, or do you want to tell people how they can best find your books?
Well, my website is GeraldEverettJones.com. There's the full book list there. The first book in the Preacher series happens to be free. and I think, and for a limited time, I think the second book in the series is not, well, we're talking ebooks, of course, but Australia, that's the easiest way to get them anyway, right? So the second one, 99 cents for a limited time. I don't know, something like that. But yes, so that, and I actually have a brand new Substack blog at Gerald Everett Jones on Substack, and I'm really enjoying that. So I mean, that audience, there's about 6,000 folks now, and I'm posting like reviews of books that are either intrigue me or that I think are kind of like what I did. I mean, maybe you'd say I'm guilt by association. I'm hoping some of that success will rub off. So that can be interesting reading, and I try to keep everything coffee break short. So
I love that.
Yeah, Substack is a great platform. I'm really enjoying it.
Awesome. Gerald, thank you very much for taking the time. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Damien. It's a privilege, and best to everyone in us.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.